Malware has probably become the single largest threat to our networks and to the functionalities of our computers, be it individual user workstations, user handheld devices, or the entire network itself. Malware is such a big topic. We're going to break this video into two parts. And in the first part, we're going to go through some of the most common malware threats, and then we'll finish that out in part two. So let's start off and talk about exactly what is malware. Malware is really two words put together, malicious software. And so malware is any program, or it could just be little code snippets or scripts that take some action that you do not want on your computer. Now, malware can be classified into 9 major categories. First one is called grayware, and then pop-ups, spyware, spam, viruses, worms, macros, Trojan horses. And then we'll end with rootkits. Every one of these has its own method of entry. We have different ways of dealing with every one of these, and some of them, for example, with pop-ups and spam, sometimes the cure may be a little bit worse than the disease. So we have to kind of be careful about how we balance the solution with that. Now, the idea with most malware is it gets introduced onto the computer without the user's knowledge. So the best way for all of these, a blanket statement here, to protect against malware in your network is user education. Educate the user as to how this stuff gets in, when you see it, what to do, definitely what not to do with it. And so let's just kind of work through some of that. First of all, let's talk about grayware. These are programs that do not do any real damage. What it will do is it'll make the experience of using the computer a lot more irritating. It'll make the environment less friendly, less pleasant, and the overall experience is less efficient. Now, we're talking about things like ads, redirects, all those sorts of things. And so you go to a website, it looks like it's legitimate. It may even provide a good product, a little bit of data information. Weather sites have been known for this for years. And then suddenly, after you visited that site, you start to get ads showing up in places. We'll talk about pop-ups later, but also you kind of start getting some weird redirects to other places. Now, keep in mind, this isn't doing any real damage to any data on your computer, but it has affected you somewhat, and it is starting to irritate. Now, one of the things that you may see as a result of grayware is what's called pop-ups. And this is an individual window that appears on the screen. You've all seen these, right? Now, the main thing with pop-ups is usually they're trying to trick the user into navigating to the target, which would be their website, instead of closing the pop-up. Now, everybody has just been trained. You close a window by clicking on that red X at the upper right. Well, a lot of these pop-ups makes that red X, if you're a mad scientist programmer type, you already know you can make that X do whatever you want to in code. And so we can use that when someone clicks on that, have that click event, redirect them to the website that we want them to go to. Now, that website may introduce something much more nefarious into the mix here, but the pop-up itself is relatively safe. It's just irritating. A lot of times you'll see in these pop-ups a little box at the bottom that says close. Well, if you click on the red X, you've actually hit the link to go to wherever they wanted you. Now, disallowing pop-ups, most browsers will disallow pop-ups. However, what happens when our own internal programmers write web applications that use pop-ups for login screens and so forth? And so suddenly you never see a login screen. So turning them off in the browser a lot of times prevents as many problems as it cures. So the best thing to do with pop-ups is educate your users. Show them a pop-up that's dangerous. Teach them to not just click on the X in the upper right as a reflex, and to report these things and to stay away from sites where they see them. Now, spyware is another thing that's particularly dangerous. This runs distributed computing applications in the background. Now, distributed computing application is an application that runs remotely and connects different computers across a network. These things will introduce code that will track your browsing habits and email it or transfer it back to the source. It'll capture keystrokes, and now we're talking about things like capturing passwords, credit card numbers, all kind of personal identification things like social security numbers and those sorts of things. And it can even invade your contacts list and use your email. It just kind of gets uglier and uglier and uglier. Spyware is really starting to get dangerous. And spyware will severely affect the computer performance because it starts to run some pretty hefty programs in the background. And usually when a relative calls and says, can you take a look at my computer? It's gotten so slow, I can't stand to use it. It's probably loaded with all kinds of malware. Now, spam is nothing more than unsolicited email. It's like junk mail in a physical mailbox. The big problem with spam, it places a considerable strain on mail servers because the majority of our mail may in fact be spam. Spam often contains malware or links to dangerous websites or attachments that are not safe. And then, of course, everybody's favorite, the virus. This is a malicious program with two very simple goals: to run, cause problems on the machine, and replicate itself to another disk, another drive, and so forth. So that's the basics on these. Join me in part 2 and we'll finish talking about these, and we'll talk generally about how to deal with cleaning this stuff up.